What would you bet on a mechanic everyone underestimated? Marcus stared at the sleek Aston Martin Valkyrie, a $12 million machine that had stumped every expert who touched it. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from knowing this moment could change everything. Sometimes the problem isn't what's broken, he whispered, it's what was never right to begin with. But when Richard Harrington sneered and said, "This isn't a Honda Civic, Washington," did anyone realize they were witnessing the beginning of an extraordinary transformation? What happens when hidden talent finally gets its moment to shine? Dear viewer, if you are watching my story for the first time, I humbly request you write the location from where you are watching right now, subscribe this channel and press the bell icon now not to miss the notifications of my daily published news stories. Thank you, and let's dive into the full story. The morning sun glinted off the polished cars at Harrington Luxury Motors, the most prestigious auto repair shop in the city. Marcus Washington wiped the sweat from his brow as he meticulously worked on a Ferrari's transmission. At 32, he'd spent 15 years honing his craft, yet remained in the shadow of less talented mechanics who happened to have the right connections, or the right skin color. "Washington. You finished with that transmission yet?" Richard Harrington's voice boomed across the garage. The dealership owner, a tall man with silver hair and a permanent scowl, approached with quick strides. "Almost, sir. Just making final adjustments to ensure optimal performance," Marcus replied without looking up from his work. Richard scoffed. "Well, hurry it up. I've got the Jensen account coming in, and I need James on that one." Marcus bit his tongue. He'd fixed 3 Jensens last month, but whenever high-profile clients came in, Richard made sure to assign white mechanics to the job. "You know," Devin Lewis whispered as Richard walked away, "one day that man's gonna realize what he's missing by not putting you on the premium clients." Devin, Marcus's closest friend at the garage, was the only other black mechanic on staff. They'd started around the same time, brought together by their shared love of engines and the shared experience of being overlooked. "Don't hold your breath," Marcus replied, carefully tightening a bolt. "Been here 5 years and nothing's changed." James Cooper, the senior mechanic with 30 years of experience, walked by and observed Marcus's work. Unlike Richard, James recognized talent regardless of where it came from. "Clean work as always, Washington," he commented quietly. "Your precision's better than half the specialists I've trained." Marcus nodded appreciatively. James had been the only one to take him under his wing when he started, teaching him the nuances of luxury engines that his technical school hadn't covered. The shop had a strict hierarchy. Richard's friends and golf buddies at the top, followed by mechanics with prestigious certifications, and at the bottom, talented guys like Marcus who could fix anything but weren't given the chance to prove it on the high-end vehicles. As the day progressed, Marcus watched Richard parade clients through the showroom, boasting about his world-class team while gesturing toward everyone but him. The familiar sting of invisibility settled in his chest as he finished the transmission and moved on to his next assignment, a basic oil change that any apprentice could handle. One day, he whispered to himself, hands steady despite his frustration, "They'll see what I can really do." Little did Marcus know, that day was coming sooner than he thought. The following Tuesday brought chaos to Harrington Luxury Motors. A sleek, midnight blue Aston Martin Valkyrie, one of only 150 in the world, was towed in with an engine problem that had stumped 3 other high-end garages. The owner, Thomas Wilcox, a tech mogul and social media celebrity with 20 million followers, paced the customer lounge, agitated and making demands. "I've been to every top shop in the region," he complained loudly. "Nobody can figure it out. The engine makes this strange knocking noise at exactly 5,500 RPM, then the whole system goes haywire." Richard was practically sweating through his designer suit, knowing the publicity that would come from either fixing or failing to fix the celebrity's rare car. "I assure you, Mr. Wilcox, my team is the best in the business. We'll diagnose the problem immediately." Marcus looked up from the BMW he was servicing, instantly intrigued. Problems that stumped multiple mechanics were exactly the kind of challenge he lived for. Richard assembled his dream team, 3 senior mechanics with impressive certifications and decades of experience. Marcus watched as they huddled around the open hood, their faces growing increasingly perplexed as hours passed. By lunchtime, the senior team was still baffled. The car's computerized diagnostics showed no errors, yet the problem persisted. Marcus could hear them arguing about possible causes as he ate his sandwich in the break room. Could be the timing chain, James suggested. No, we checked that twice, another mechanic replied. I'm thinking it's an intermittent electronic issue. Marcus's mind was racing. The description of the problem, the specific RPM where it occurred, it reminded him of something he'd read in an obscure engineering forum. He approached the group cautiously. Excuse me, he began, but has anyone checked for resonance issues with the intake manifold? Four pairs of eyes turned to him with expressions ranging from surprise to annoyance. This isn't a Honda Civic, Washington, Richard said dismissively. This is a $12 million hypercar with a hybrid powertrain. I understand that, sir, but I've read about similar. Get back to your station, Richard cut him off. We don't have time for guesswork. James gave Marcus an apologetic look but said nothing. Devon shook his head sympathetically as Marcus returned to his workstation, frustration burning in his chest. Throughout the afternoon, Marcus kept glancing at the Aston Martin. The senior team had disassembled parts of the engine, still searching for the elusive problem. Thomas Wilcox's patience was visibly wearing thin as he made angry phone calls in the customer lounge. They don't even want to try my suggestion, Marcus told Devon quietly during their afternoon break. It fits all the symptoms, the specific RPM, the way it affects the system. You know how it is, Devon replied. They'd rather fail on their own than succeed with your help. The day ended with the problem still unsolved. Richard assured Thomas they'd figure it out by the next day, but the tech mogul's expression suggested his confidence was quickly eroding. As the garage emptied for the night, Marcus lingered, staring at the disassembled hypercar. The solution was there, just out of everyone's reach, except, perhaps, his own. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor to Harrington Luxury Motors. Elizabeth Liz Chen, a renowned automotive engineer from Chen Innovations, arrived for what Richard called a strategic partnership discussion. In reality, Liz's company was considering acquiring Richard's struggling business, though few employees knew the real purpose of her visit. At 35, Liz had made a name for herself designing revolutionary electric vehicle components. Her presence commanded respect, evidenced by Richard's unusually obsequious behavior as he guided her through the facility. And here's our main service area, Richard announced, sweeping his arm dramatically as they entered the garage. Only certified master mechanics work on our premium vehicles. Liz nodded politely, her sharp eyes taking in every detail of the operation. She paused when she noticed Marcus meticulously reassembling an engine with surgical precision. What about him? She asked, nodding toward Marcus. Richard's smile faltered slightly. Oh, Washington. He handles our standard maintenance. Oil changes, tire rotations, that sort of thing. Liz raised an eyebrow but said nothing as they continued the tour. Unknown to Richard, she had noticed the careful way Marcus's hands moved, the methodical approach that spoke of someone who understood machinery on an intuitive level. Later that morning, while Richard was distracted with a phone call, Liz doubled back to the main garage area. She observed Marcus from a distance as he diagnosed a complex electrical issue in a Mercedes in half the time it would have taken most mechanics. You've got good hands, she commented, approaching his station. Marcus looked up, surprised. Thank you, ma'am. It's Liz. She smiled. How long have you been working with luxury vehicles? 5 years here, plus 10 years at other shops before that, Marcus replied, carefully replacing the Mercedes diagnostic panel. But I've been taking engines apart since I was 12. Self-taught? Marcus nodded. Started with my uncle's broken-down Cadillac. Then went to technical school, but most of what I know comes from hands-on experience. Their conversation was interrupted when Devon approached, looking agitated. They're still stuck on the Aston Martin, he whispered to Marcus. James was asking if you had any more thoughts, but he didn't want to ask in front of Richard. Liz's interest was piqued. The Aston Martin Valkyrie? That's Thomas Wilcox's car, isn't it? I read about his problems on social media. Yes, ma'am, I mean, Liz, Devon replied. Been here since yesterday. Nobody can figure out what's wrong with it. Marcus hesitated, then spoke carefully. I have a theory, but Mr. Harrington isn't interested in hearing it. Liz's eyes narrowed. Tell me. For the next 10 minutes, Marcus explained his reasoning about harmonic resonance in the intake manifold, how the specific RPM created a vibration pattern that interfered with the car's sensitive electronic systems. His explanation was detailed, precise, and demonstrated an understanding of engineering principles that surprised Liz. That's actually a compelling theory, she said when he finished. Why won't they let you look at it? Devon gave a bitter laugh. Take a wild guess. Liz's expression darkened with understanding. Before she could respond, Richard's voice boomed across the garage. Ms. Chen. There you are. I thought I'd lost you, he said, hurrying over. I see you've met some of our junior staff. Yes, Liz replied coolly. We were having a fascinating discussion about harmonic resonance in hybrid powertrains. Richard looked between her and Marcus, confusion evident on his face. Well, that's certainly an advanced topic. Perhaps you'd like to continue our tour. I'm eager to show you our customer service approach. As Richard led her away, Liz glanced back at Marcus with an appraising look that suggested their conversation wasn't over. Later that afternoon, as Marcus was finishing his shift, he overheard Richard in heated discussion with the senior mechanics. The Aston Martin remained unfixed, Thomas Wilcox was threatening to blast the shop on social media, and tensions were running high. I don't care what it takes, Richard hissed. That car needs to be fixed by tomorrow, or we can kiss our reputation goodbye. Marcus exchanged looks with Devon. They both knew what needed to be done, but would pride and prejudice continue to stand in the way of the solution? As Marcus gathered his tools to leave, he noticed Liz Chen watching the scene unfold, her calculator mind clearly putting pieces together that Richard couldn't see. For the first time in years, Marcus felt a glimmer of hope that his skills might finally be recognized, but first, someone would need to take a chance on him. The security guard's footsteps echoed through the empty garage as he made his final rounds for the night. Marcus crouched behind a tool cabinet, holding his breath until the guard passed. He hadn't planned on staying after hours, it could cost him his job, but the solution to the Aston Martin's problem had been gnawing at him all day. Once the guard moved to the next building, Marcus emerged from his hiding spot and made his way to the hypercar. The midnight blue Valkyrie sat in the diagnostic bay, partially disassembled by the day team's unsuccessful efforts. Under the stark fluorescent lights, it looked like a wounded exotic animal. Let's see what's really going on with you, Marcus whispered, pulling on latex gloves and retrieving his personal diagnostic equipment from his backpack. As he worked, memories flooded back from his childhood in South Atlanta. He was 8 years old again, sitting on an overturned milk crate in his uncle's garage, watching with fascination as the older man coaxed an abandoned Cadillac back to life. Engines talk to you if you know how to listen, his uncle had said, placing Marcus's small hand on the valve cover. Feel that vibration? That's her telling us something's not right. That lesson had stayed with him through technical school, through jobs at shops that undervalued him, through nights spent studying engineering principles online because formal education was beyond his financial reach. Now, as he carefully examined the Aston Martin's intake system, Marcus employed the same methodical approach his uncle had taught him. He connected his laptop to the car's diagnostic port and ran a custom diagnostic program he developed himself. There you are, he murmured after 20 minutes, spotting an anomaly in the data that the standard diagnostic tools had missed. The frequency response graph confirmed his suspicion about harmonic resonance. The sound of a door opening startled him. Marcus quickly stood, ready to explain himself or make a dash for it if necessary. I had a feeling you might be here, said a familiar voice. Liz Chen emerged from the shadows, arms crossed but expression more curious than accusatory. Ms. Chen, I can explain, Marcus began. It's still Liz, she corrected, moving closer to examine his setup. And no explanation needed. I'd have done the same thing in your position. She studied his laptop screen, eyebrows rising as she took in his custom diagnostic software. You wrote this yourself? Marcus nodded cautiously. Standard diagnostics don't look for harmonic patterns. This one does. Impressive. She leaned in closer. You were right about the resonance issue. It's creating a feedback loop in the electronic system at that specific RPM. For the next hour, they discussed potential solutions, Liz treating Marcus as an equal rather than a subordinate. She asked probing questions that challenged his thinking and offered insights from her engineering background that filled gaps in his self-taught knowledge. Why are you helping me? Marcus finally asked. You barely know me. Liz's expression turned serious. Because talent should be recognized, regardless of who possesses it. And because I've been where you are, underestimated, overlooked. She glanced around the garage. Richard doesn't realize what he has in you. My girlfriend Vanessa says the same thing, Marcus admitted. She's been urging me to start my own shop for years, but startup costs are prohibitive. Sometimes opportunity comes from unexpected places, Liz replied cryptically. She checked her watch. We should go. But Marcus, don't fix the car yet. I have an idea that might change things around here. As they prepared to leave, Liz studied him thoughtfully. You know, in my experience, people who teach themselves often understand principles more deeply than those who just follow instructions. You've got real engineering instinct. Her words stayed with Marcus long after he'd arrived home to his small apartment, where Vanessa was already asleep after her late nursing shift. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to imagine a future where his skills were valued, not just tolerated. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, he finally had confirmation of what he'd always believed: he belonged in this field, whether Richard Harrington thought so or not. The following evening, Richard Harrington hosted a business dinner at Costello's, the city's most exclusive restaurant. The guest list included Gerald Simpson, a wealthy investor interested in luxury automotive ventures, and Elizabeth Chen, whose company's potential acquisition of Harrington Motors remained Richard's best hope for financial recovery. The Wilcox situation is unfortunate, Richard explained over expensive scotch, but I assure you both, my top team will resolve it tomorrow. Gerald, a shrewd businessman with salt and pepper hair and calculating eyes, seemed skeptical. 3 days to fix one car. Doesn't inspire confidence, Richard. Richard's face reddened. This is an extremely rare vehicle with a unique problem. Even the manufacturer's technicians were stumped. Liz, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke. Actually, I believe one of your mechanics already knows the solution. Richard looked confused. James mentioned something, but we've tried all standard approaches. Not James, Liz corrected. Marcus Washington. The table fell silent. Richard's expression cycled through confusion, disbelief, and barely concealed disdain. Washington? He's a basic maintenance technician, Richard scoffed. Gerald leaned forward, intrigued. If he has a solution, why haven't you let him try it? Richard fumbled for words. He lacks the certifications for a vehicle of that caliber. It would be irresponsible. Interesting, Gerald mused, swirling his scotch. Where I come from, results matter more than credentials. A sly smile formed on his face. Let's make this interesting, Richard. A bet. Richard shifted uncomfortably. A bet? Yes. Let this Marcus fellow try his solution. If he fixes the car, you promote him to senior mechanic with appropriate pay. If he fails, no harm done, you're no worse off than you are now. Liz watched Richard squirm, adding calmly, it would certainly make for an interesting case study in management approaches. Richard, cornered and unwilling to appear biased in front of potential business partners, forced a smile. Fine. Washington gets one shot, tomorrow morning. Gerald raised his glass. I look forward to witnessing this. I'll come by with Thomas, he's an old friend. In fact, let's raise the stakes. If Marcus succeeds, I'll consider a significant investment in your business. Richard's eyes widened at the prospect. With the garage facing financial difficulties, Gerald's investment could be salvation, if he was willing to swallow his pride. And if he fails? Richard asked. Gerald shrugged. Then perhaps your traditional approach is best after all. As they concluded the dinner, Liz stepped away to make a phone call. In the restaurant's quiet corridor, she dialed Marcus's number. It's done, she told him. Tomorrow at 9 a.m., you get your chance with the Aston Martin. On the other end of the line, Marcus felt a mixture of excitement and trepidation. This was the opportunity he'd been waiting for, but the pressure would be immense. Thank you, he said simply. Don't thank me yet, Liz replied. Just do what you do best. Marcus couldn't sleep that night. The opportunity to prove himself battled with the fear of failure in his mind. If he succeeded, it could change everything. If he failed, it would only reinforce the prejudice he fought against daily. At 2 a.m., he slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Vanessa, and went to the small desk in the corner of their bedroom. He opened his laptop and began reviewing his notes on the Aston Martin's issues, methodically planning his approach for the morning. By dawn, he had triple-checked his calculations and mapped out every step of the repair process. When Vanessa's alarm went off at 5:30 a.m. for her early hospital shift, she found him still working. You didn't sleep, she observed, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. Couldn't, he admitted. This is too important. Vanessa studied the diagrams on his screen. Though not mechanically inclined herself, she'd listened to Marcus explain countless automotive problems over their 6 years together. She'd seen his passion, his frustration, and his unwavering dedication to his craft. You've got this, she said, kissing his forehead. You've been solving problems they couldn't for years. This time they're just going to watch you do it. Her confidence steadied him. After she left for work, Marcus called the one person who might offer additional insight, James Cooper, his mentor at the garage. You're sure about this resonance theory? James asked after Marcus explained his approach. Positive, Marcus replied. The frequency matches perfectly with what happens in the engine control unit. James sighed. Richard's not going to like it if you're right. He'll like it even less that he had to be pushed into letting you try. I'm not doing this to embarrass anyone, Marcus said. I just want to fix the car and maybe get a fair shot going forward. Fair shots don't come easy for guys like us, James replied, his voice carrying the weight of his own struggles as an older black mechanic. But if anyone deserves one, it's you. I've seen hundreds of mechanics come through that garage, and your instincts are among the best. After the call, Marcus drove to a small shop in the industrial district to visit his uncle, now 72 and retired but still keeping his hand in with occasional restoration projects. The old man listened attentively as Marcus outlined the problem and his solution, occasionally nodding or asking clarifying questions. When Marcus finished, his uncle sat back in his worn office chair. You're overthinking it, he said finally. You know engines better than most engineers with fancy degrees. Trust your hands and your ear, they've never led you wrong. Marcus left with his uncle's words echoing in his mind. The old man was right. He'd spent years doubting himself because others doubted him. Today, that would end. He arrived at the garage 45 minutes early, finding Devon already waiting for him. Word spread fast, Devon said, grinning. Everyone's talking about the bet. Marcus groaned. Great. More pressure. Hey, man, this is your moment. All those times Richard passed you over for promotions, all those premium jobs he gave to less qualified techs, today you show him what he's been missing. As they entered the garage, Marcus was surprised to find James already there, organizing tools and clearing space around the Aston Martin. Figured you could use a proper setup, James explained. Also, I pulled the service records from the other shops that attempted repairs. Might give you some insight into what not to try. Marcus felt a surge of gratitude. Despite the risks to his own standing with Richard, James was openly supporting him. It was a small act of solidarity that meant more than James could know. By 8:30 a.m., Marcus had everything prepared. He'd checked his tools 3 times and reviewed the technical diagrams until he could see them with his eyes closed. He was as ready as he'd ever be. At 8:45, other mechanics began filtering in, curiosity evident on their faces. At 8:55, Richard arrived with Gerald Simpson and Elizabeth Chin. Thomas Wilcox showed up moments later, his expression skeptical as Richard explained what was happening. "You're telling me you've had someone who could fix my car all along?" Thomas demanded. Richard forced a smile. "We're giving him a chance to try his theory. If it works, everyone wins." As the clock struck 9 a.m., all eyes turned to Marcus. The moment of truth had arrived. The garage fell silent as Marcus approached the Aston Martin. He felt every eye on him, Richard's doubtful glare, Liz's encouraging nod, Devon's nervous smile, and Thomas Wilcox's impatient scrutiny. Taking a deep breath, Marcus blocked them all out and focused solely on the machine before him. "I'll need complete access to the engine control unit and intake manifold," he announced calmly, pulling on his gloves. James stepped forward. "I've already pulled the access panels for you." Marcus nodded gratefully and began systematically examining the engine components that the senior team had already disassembled. Unlike their haphazard approach, Marcus worked methodically, documenting each part's condition before moving to the next. "Is this really necessary?" Richard interrupted after 15 minutes. "We've already checked all those components." "With all due respect, sir," Marcus replied without looking up, "I need to verify everything myself. Different eyes see different things." Gerald chuckled, further irritating Richard. "Man knows his process. Let him work." Marcus continued his examination, occasionally making notes on a small pad. After 30 minutes, he connected his laptop to the diagnostic port and ran his custom software. The screen displayed waveforms and frequency patterns that meant nothing to most observers but confirmed Marcus's theory. "Look here," he explained to Liz, who had moved closer. "The resonant frequency peaks exactly at 5,500 RPM, creating interference with the ECU's input signals." Liz nodded appreciatively. "Causing the system to misinterpret sensor data." "Precisely." Richard checked his watch pointedly. "This technical discussion is fascinating, but can you fix it or not?" Marcus straightened. "Yes. The problem is a manufacturing defect in the intake manifold. The internal geometry creates a harmonic vibration at specific RPMs that disrupts the sensor readings. It's not technically broken, it's a design flaw." Thomas Wilcox frowned. "If it's a design flaw, how do you plan to fix it?" "I'll modify the manifold to dampen the resonance and recalibrate the ECU to filter out any remaining harmonic noise," Marcus explained. "I'll need about 3 hours." Richard scoffed. 3 hours? The senior team couldn't solve it in 3 days. "Because they were looking for a broken part, not a flawed design," Marcus replied evenly. "Sometimes the problem isn't what's broken, it's what was never right to begin with." The double meaning wasn't lost on anyone present. Richard's face flushed with anger, but Gerald's amused expression held him in check. "You have 2 hours," Richard countered, a final attempt to assert control. "Thomas has a flight this afternoon." Marcus looked to Thomas, ignoring Richard entirely. "Sir, I can rush and give you a temporary fix, or I can do it right and ensure the problem never returns. Your choice." Thomas studied Marcus for a moment, then nodded. "Do it right. I'll reschedule my flight." For the next hour, Marcus worked with surgical precision. He carefully modified the manifold's internal structure using a specialized tool he brought from home, explaining each step to Liz, who watched with undisguised admiration. Devon assisted, handing tools before Marcus even asked for them, a testament to their years working together. Richard hovered nearby, periodically making comments designed to undermine Marcus's confidence. "That modification will void the manufacturer's warranty," he warned loudly. Without missing a beat, Marcus replied, "The warranty doesn't cover design flaws, and the manufacturer's own mechanics couldn't fix it. Sometimes innovation requires looking beyond conventional approaches." Gerald nodded approvingly, making Richard even more agitated. As the second hour began, Richard resorted to more direct tactics. "We have another client coming in at noon," he announced. "We'll need this bay cleared." James intervened. "I've rescheduled all appointments until 2 p.m., sir. I assumed we'd want to give this our full attention." Richard glared at his senior mechanic, realizing that more of his staff supported Marcus than he'd thought. The power dynamics were shifting before his eyes, and there was little he could do about it. As Marcus continued working, the atmosphere in the garage transformed. Other mechanics gathered to watch him implement his solution, whispering among themselves about techniques they'd never considered. Even Thomas Wilcox appeared impressed by the level of craftsmanship on display. "Where did you learn this approach?" Liz asked as Marcus carefully calibrated the ECU to account for his modifications. "Nowhere formal," he admitted. "Years of problem solving and late nights studying engineering principles online. When you can't afford engineering school, you find other ways to learn." The timer Richard had ostentatiously set on his phone beeped as the 2-hour mark arrived. "Time's up," he announced with poorly concealed satisfaction. "Let's see if this unconventional approach actually works." Marcus closed the access panel and stood up straight, confidence evident in his posture despite the pressure. "It's ready for testing." The moment had arrived to test Marcus's solution. Thomas Wilcox slid into the driver's seat of his Aston Martin while Marcus connected a diagnostic tablet to monitor the engine parameters in real time. The garage doors were open to allow for the car to be driven onto the private test track behind the facility. "We'll need to run it through several acceleration cycles," Marcus explained. "The problem occurs specifically at 5,500 RPM, so we'll need to hit that point multiple times to ensure the fix is complete." Thomas nodded and started the engine. The hypercar's massive power plant roared to life, settling into a smooth, aggressive idle that sent vibrations through the concrete floor. Everyone moved outside to watch the test, tension evident on every face. The first run went perfectly. Thomas accelerated hard, pushing past 5,500 RPM without any issues. The second and third runs were equally flawless. Marcus watched his diagnostic readings carefully, noting with satisfaction that the harmonic interference had been eliminated. "One more full throttle run," Marcus called out. "Let's push it all the way to redline this time." Thomas grinned and lined up for a final pass. The Aston Martin launched forward with breathtaking acceleration, the engine note climbing from a growl to a scream as it approached 5,500 RPM. It sailed past the critical point without hesitation, continuing to accelerate until a warning light flashed on the dashboard. The engine stuttered momentarily before regaining power. Marcus's heart sank as Thomas brought the car back to the garage. This wasn't supposed to happen. His calculations had been perfect. His modifications had addressed the resonance issue completely. What had he missed? "So much for your theory," Richard said loudly enough for everyone to hear, unable to hide his satisfaction. "At least we tried your unconventional approach." Marcus ignored him, connecting his laptop to run a full diagnostic. The data showed that the resonance issue was indeed solved, but a secondary problem had emerged, a fuel pressure irregularity that only appeared under extreme load. "It's a separate issue," Marcus explained, struggling to keep frustration from his voice. "Unrelated to the resonance problem." "Convenient excuse," Richard remarked. "But I think we've all seen enough." Marcus felt a familiar weight of defeat settling over him. He'd been so close, only to fail at the final hurdle. The weight of everyone's expectations, and his own, crushed down on him. In that moment, a memory surfaced from his childhood. He was 11 years old, sitting in his middle school classroom when the teacher had asked a complex math question. Marcus had raised his hand, confident in his answer, only to be ignored. When he'd finally spoken up without being called on, the teacher had humiliated him in front of the class. People like you should focus on subjects more suited to your abilities, she'd said dismissively. That day, he'd gone home and solved every math problem in the textbook, determined to prove her wrong. His mother had found him asleep at the kitchen table, pencil still in hand, and understood immediately what had happened. You don't need their permission to be brilliant, she told him the next morning. Your mind is your own. Now, 20 years later, standing in a garage full of doubters, his mother's words echoed in his mind. He didn't need Richard's approval to solve this problem. I need 30 more minutes, Marcus announced firmly. The resonance issue is fixed. There's a secondary problem with the fuel delivery system. Richard shook his head. We agreed on a timeline. You've had your chance. Actually, Thomas Wilcox interjected, I'm the client here, and I decide when we're done. I want to see what he finds. Richard was cornered. Gerald and Liz watched with interest as the power dynamic shifted once again. Marcus immediately reopened the engine compartment and traced the fuel lines, looking for the cause of the irregularity. Devon stood by him, offering silent support, while James provided guidance based on his decades of experience. Check the pressure regulator, James suggested quietly. That model has a known weakness there. Marcus nodded gratefully and focused his attention on the component. Sure enough, under extreme stress, the regulator was fluctuating outside acceptable parameters. The regulator's failing intermittently under high load, Marcus explained to Thomas. It would have eventually left you stranded, even if the resonance issue hadn't appeared first. Can you fix it? Thomas asked. Yes, but I'll need to replace the component. We should have one in stock. James disappeared and returned moments later with the part. Marcus worked quickly, aware that Richard was watching for any mistake, any reason to discredit his efforts. Vanessa called while he was finishing the installation. Devon answered for him, putting the phone on speaker. How's it going? She asked, her voice providing an instant dose of calm amidst the chaos. Almost there, Marcus replied, tightening the final connection. Had a setback, but we're pushing through. That's my man, she said proudly. Remember what I always tell you, there's no problem I can't solve if I trust myself, Marcus finished, smiling despite the pressure. I remember. I've got to get back to my patients, but I'm with you in spirit. Love you. Love you too. With renewed determination, Marcus completed the fuel system repair and ran a full diagnostic check. Everything looked perfect. Ready for another test, he announced, looking directly at Thomas rather than Richard. The skepticism had vanished from Thomas's eyes, replaced by something that looked remarkably like respect. The second test drive began with an atmosphere of cautious optimism. Marcus rode in the passenger seat this time, monitoring the diagnostic tablet while Thomas Wilcox piloted the hypercar around the track. As they approached 5,500 RPM, Marcus held his breath. They sailed past the critical threshold smoothly. No warning lights, no hesitation, just pure, unbridled performance as the Aston Martin unleashed its full potential. Thomas pushed harder, taking the car all the way to its red line. The engine responded flawlessly. My God, Thomas said, a broad smile spreading across his face. It's never run this well, even when it was new. Marcus allowed himself a small smile as they completed several more high-speed runs. Each time, the car performed perfectly, with no sign of the problems that had plagued it. The resonance modification actually improved throttle response, Marcus explained as they returned to the garage. By eliminating that harmonic interference, the ECU can process sensor data more accurately, giving you better performance across the power band. Thomas parked the car amid a crowd of onlookers. The entire garage had gathered to witness the outcome, word having spread about the unprecedented challenge. As they exited the vehicle, Thomas turned to Marcus with undisguised admiration. 3 high-end shops couldn't figure this out, he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. You solved 2 problems they didn't even properly diagnose. Richard Harrington stood rigid, his expression a complex mixture of disbelief, resentment, and, most noticeably, fear. The narrative he'd constructed about Marcus and mechanics like him was crumbling before his eyes. Elizabeth Chen approached, having watched the test from the sidelines. "Impressive work," she said to Marcus. "You implemented a solution that most engineers would have needed days to develop." Devon clapped Marcus on the shoulder, unable to contain his pride. "That's what I've been saying for years. The man's a genius with engines." Gerald Simpson stepped forward, addressing Richard directly. "I believe our bet has a clear winner, Harrington. This man deserves that promotion, and I'd say a substantial raise as well." Richard cleared his throat, struggling to maintain his composure. "Yes, well. Washington certainly showed unexpected aptitude today." "Unexpected?" James Cooper interjected, breaking his usual diplomatic silence. "With all due respect, sir, there's nothing unexpected about it. I've been telling you for years that Marcus is the most talented mechanic in this garage." Richard's face reddened further. Before he could respond, Thomas Wilcox joined the conversation. "What would it take to hire you away from here?" he asked Marcus directly. "I have connections to racing teams that would value your skills considerably more than," he glanced at Richard, "your current employer seems to." The question caught Marcus off guard. He'd been so focused on proving himself that he hadn't considered the possibilities that might open up afterward. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Wilcox, but I'd need to give that some thought." Liz observed the exchange with interest, her analytical mind clearly processing possibilities of her own. Richard, sensing that the situation was spiraling beyond his control, attempted to reassert authority. "This is all premature. Yes, Marcus successfully addressed this particular issue, but one success doesn't warrant disrupting our entire organizational structure." Gerald's eyebrows shot up. "A bet's a bet, Richard. Unless your word isn't good." The implication hung heavily in the air. In the world of luxury automotive business, reputation was everything. Richard couldn't afford to be seen as someone who reneged on agreements. Of course, Richard conceded stiffly. "Marcus will receive the promised promotion. I'll have HR prepare the paperwork." For Marcus, the victory felt surreal. After years of being overlooked and undervalued, his skills had finally been recognized, not just by his colleagues, but by important figures in the industry. The validation was sweet, but something in Richard's grudging concession left a bitter aftertaste. This wasn't a change of heart or a recognition of past injustice, it was a forced hand, a reluctant acknowledgement extracted under duress and witnessed by too many people to be denied. As the crowd dispersed and normal garage operations resumed, Marcus found himself alone with the Aston Martin, running a final systems check before returning the keys to Thomas. Devon had returned to his own workstation, and James was dealing with another client. In this moment of solitude, the magnitude of what he'd accomplished finally hit him. His hands trembled slightly as he disconnected his diagnostic equipment. This wasn't just about fixing an expensive car or winning a bet, it was about breaking through barriers that had held him back his entire career. Elizabeth Chen appeared at his side, having quietly returned to the garage. "You know," she said conversationally, "moments like this are rare in a career, when someone's true potential becomes undeniable." Marcus nodded, still processing his emotions. "It feels good to be seen." "The question is," Liz continued, "what will you do with this momentum? Accept a promotion in a place that only valued you when forced to, or look for opportunities where your talents will be appreciated from day one?" Her words resonated deeply. As Marcus closed the Aston Martin's hood, he realized that today's victory wasn't the end of his journey, it was just the beginning. Thomas Wilcox insisted on taking Marcus for a proper test drive beyond the confines of the garage's small track. With Richard's reluctant blessing, they headed onto the open road, the Aston Martin's engine purring like a contented predator. "I've owned this car for 2 years," Thomas said as they accelerated onto the highway, "and it's never run this smoothly." Marcus nodded, monitoring the diagnostic tablet propped on his lap. All parameters remained perfect as they pushed the car through various driving conditions, highway cruising, sharp acceleration, and finally, a series of winding mountain roads that tested the vehicle's handling. "Tell me something," Thomas said as they pulled over at a scenic overlook, the city sprawled out beneath them. How does someone with your obvious talent end up being underutilized at a place like Harrington's? Marcus considered the question carefully. It's a familiar story, Mr. Wilcox. I didn't have the advantages that opened doors automatically. No family connections, no money for prestigious schools. What I had was talent and determination. And yet that wasn't enough. Rarely is, in certain industries. Marcus gazed at the horizon. Excellence is just the entry fee when you look like me. You also need someone willing to give you a chance. Thomas nodded thoughtfully. I understand more than you might think. Before my tech success, I faced similar barriers in Silicon Valley. Different context, same prejudice. As they continued their drive, Thomas shared his own story of overcoming bias in the technology sector, creating parallels that bridged their different worlds. By the time they returned to the garage, a genuine connection had formed between them. The parking lot was unusually full when they arrived. Several expensive cars had appeared during their absence, including Gerald Simpson's Bentley and a sleek Tesla that Marcus assumed belonged to Elizabeth Chen. Looks like you've drawn a crowd, Thomas observed as they pulled in. Inside, they found Richard hosting an impromptu gathering of wealthy clients and business associates. When he spotted Thomas and Marcus, his expression tightened momentarily before he forced a smile. There they are. Richard announced with artificial enthusiasm. Thomas, how did she perform? Better than new, Thomas replied, placing a hand on Marcus's shoulder. This man works miracles. The assembled visitors, mostly older white men in expensive suits, regarded Marcus with curious expressions ranging from genuine interest to barely concealed skepticism. Was it the resonance issue you mentioned earlier? One asked. Marcus nodded. Yes, sir. The intake manifold was creating harmonic interference at specific RPMs, disrupting the engine control systems. I modified the geometry to eliminate the resonance and recalibrated the ECU to optimize performance. Several of the men exchanged impressed glances. And you developed this solution yourself? Another questioned. Drawing on principles of acoustic engineering and fluid dynamics, Marcus confirmed. It's an unconventional approach, but conventional methods had already failed. Richard, sensing his client's growing admiration for Marcus, quickly attempted to reclaim control of the narrative. Marcus is one of our rising stars, he declared, as though he'd been fostering Marcus's talent all along. I've been mentoring him personally. James Cooper, standing nearby, couldn't suppress a disgusted snort, which he poorly disguised as a cough. Devon, who had joined the gathering, shot Richard an incredulous look. Elizabeth Chen stepped forward, her analytical gaze fixed on Marcus rather than Richard. Actually, I'd be interested in hearing more about your diagnostic methodology. The approach you described suggests an intuitive understanding of both mechanical and electronic systems. Before Marcus could respond, the garage doors opened again, and Vanessa entered. She'd changed out of her nursing scrubs into a simple but elegant dress, clearly having come directly from the hospital after her shift. Did I miss it? She asked, approaching Marcus with a warm smile. Just finished, he replied, his face brightening at her presence. The car's fixed, and Mr. Wilcox is happy. More than happy, Thomas corrected. Impressed and grateful. Vanessa beamed with pride. I told you you'd solve it. Richard cleared his throat loudly. Well, this has been a productive day, but we should probably get back to our regular operations. Marcus, you can return to your station now. HR will be in touch about your promotion. The dismissal was thinly veiled, an attempt to relegate Marcus back to his assigned place in the hierarchy despite his achievement. A tense silence fell over the group as everyone recognized the slight. Thomas Wilcox broke the silence, his voice carrying an edge of authority that came from his status as both a celebrity and a wealthy client. Actually, he said, I'm not quite ready to conclude our business. Marcus, would you mind taking a quick look at something else in the car? I noticed a slight vibration in the steering at high speeds. It was a transparent excuse to continue highlighting Marcus's expertise, and everyone knew it. Richard's face tightened as Marcus and Thomas returned to the Aston Martin, followed by several interested clients who seemed more impressed by Marcus's knowledge than Richard's hospitality. As Marcus began explaining possible causes of steering vibration, Vanessa leaned close to whisper in his ear. "Look at you, showing them all who you really are." Her eyes shone with emotion. "This is just the beginning, isn't it?" Marcus nodded, a new certainty settling in his chest. Whether at Harrington Motors or somewhere else, things would never be the same again. The door had been opened, and no one, not even Richard, could close it now. The impromptu gathering had evolved into something more significant. As Marcus answered technical questions from Thomas's friends, many of whom owned exotic cars with their own mysterious issues, Richard grew increasingly agitated. His carefully constructed social hierarchy was being dismantled before his eyes. Elizabeth Chen observed the scene with calculated interest, occasionally exchanging glances with Gerald Simpson. They appeared to be having a silent conversation amid the commotion. "Gentlemen," Gerald finally announced, "I believe this calls for a celebration. Richard, why don't you give us a tour of your facility while we discuss the future?" Richard brightened at the mention of business prospects. "Of course. I'd be happy to show you our premium service areas." As Richard led most of the group away, Liz held back, approaching Marcus, Vanessa, Devon, and James, who had gathered near the Aston Martin. "Marcus," she began without preamble, "I'd like to know more about your background. Your approach to the resonance problem suggests formal engineering training, yet Richard implied you don't have those credentials." James answered before Marcus could. "He doesn't need their fancy papers. Marcus understands engines better than half the certified engineers I've met." "Self-taught," Marcus explained, "plus technical school and a lot of hands-on experience. I couldn't afford engineering school, but I studied the principles independently." Liz nodded thoughtfully. "That explains the innovative approach. Sometimes formal education creates blind spots, everyone learning the same methods, the same limitations." Their conversation was interrupted when Thomas Wilcox returned with Richard and the other visitors. Thomas carried himself with the confident air of someone about to make an important announcement. "Marcus," he said, "I've been discussing your work with my colleagues. Several of them have vehicles that have stumped their usual mechanics. They're willing to pay premium rates for your expertise." Richard stepped forward quickly. "Any such work would need to be arranged through Harrington Motors, of course. We can schedule these gentlemen for consultations with our senior team, which will now include Marcus." Gerald raised an eyebrow. "That's not exactly what they're asking for, Richard. They want Marcus specifically." "Besides," Thomas added, "I've made Marcus an offer to join my personal technical team. I maintain a collection of rare vehicles that require specialized attention." The revelation hung in the air. Richard's face reddened as he realized he might lose his newly valuable asset before he could capitalize on Marcus's skills. "That's impossible," he sputtered. "Washington has contractual obligations." "Which can be addressed with appropriate compensation," Gerald interjected smoothly. "Everything has a price." Vanessa squeezed Marcus's hand supportively as the wealthy men essentially began bidding for his services. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Just hours ago, he'd been considered barely qualified for basic maintenance work. Elizabeth Chen, who had been silently observing, finally spoke. "Actually, I have a different proposition altogether." All eyes turned to her. As some of you know, Chen Innovations is expanding into automotive technology. We're developing advanced diagnostic systems and engine control units for next-generation vehicles. She fixed her gaze on Marcus. "We need minds that can bridge theoretical engineering with practical implementation, people who understand both the physics and the feel of high-performance engines." "You're offering him a job?" Richard asked incredulously. "I'm offering him a partnership," Liz corrected. "Marcus has demonstrated exactly the kind of innovative thinking we need, solving problems our competitors can't even properly diagnose." The garage fell silent as the magnitude of the offer sank in. A partnership at Chen Innovations wouldn't just mean a better job, it would be a complete career transformation, elevating Marcus from mechanic to engineering partner at one of the most innovative companies in the automotive sector. "This is absurd," Richard finally said. "He fixed one car with an unconventional hack. That hardly qualifies." "That hack," Liz interrupted sharply, "involved principles of acoustic engineering that most PhDs would struggle to apply practically. I reviewed his diagnostic software during our after-hours session. It's more sophisticated than tools currently available on the market." The mention of an after-hours session caused Richard's eyes to widen with understanding. "You knew about this problem before today. This whole thing was a setup." "Not a setup," Liz replied calmly. "An opportunity to demonstrate talent that you were determined to ignore. Gerard and I simply created conditions where that talent couldn't be dismissed." Devon grinned broadly at the revelation, while James nodded with quiet satisfaction. Vanessa watched Marcus's face, seeing the complex emotions playing across it as he processed what was happening. Thomas Wilcox clapped a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "The choice is yours, my friend. My offer stands if you want it. But I have to admit, Elizabeth's proposition sounds like it might be a better fit for your abilities." For Marcus, the moment felt surreal. After years of struggling to be seen, multiple doors were suddenly opening at once. He looked at Vanessa, who smiled encouragingly. "Whatever you decide," she said softly, "I'm with you." Richard, realizing he was losing control of both the situation and his audience, made one last desperate attempt. "Marcus has been a valuable member of our team," he declared with forced sincerity. "I've always recognized his potential. Perhaps we've been too rigid with our advancement policies, but I'm prepared to offer him a position as our head diagnostic specialist with an appropriate compensation package." The transparent insincerity of the offer hung awkwardly in the air. Everyone present knew that until today, Richard had never shown the slightest recognition of Marcus's talents. Devon couldn't contain himself. "Man, you didn't even let him work on luxury cars until today." James added quietly but firmly, 5 years of being overlooked doesn't disappear with one convenient change of heart, Mr. Harrington." As the reality of his situation became clear, Richard's facade finally cracked. The mask of benevolent leadership slipped, revealing the threatened, prejudiced man beneath. "Fine," he snapped. "Take him. We'll see how far natural talent gets without the proper credentials in this industry." Elizabeth Chen smiled thinly. "That's precisely what we intend to find out." 1 month later, Marcus stood in the gleaming research lab at Chen Innovations, surrounded by cutting-edge diagnostic equipment and prototype engines. His workspace, a far cry from his cramped station at Harrington Motors, featured dual computer monitors displaying the enhanced version of his diagnostic software that was now being developed for commercial release. The transition had been swift and transformative. After careful consideration of all offers, Marcus had accepted Elizabeth Chen's partnership proposal. The opportunity to develop his ideas at scale, potentially helping mechanics worldwide identify problems that conventional diagnostics missed, had been too compelling to pass up. His first project was already underway, creating a comprehensive system to detect harmonic resonance issues across various engine types, problems that were often misdiagnosed and led to expensive, unnecessary repairs. "How's it coming?" Liz asked, entering the lab with a tablet in hand. "Ahead of schedule," Marcus replied, gesturing to the test results on his screen. "We've successfully identified resonance patterns in 8 different engine configurations. The algorithm is learning with each new example." "Impressive," Liz nodded. "The automotive division is already getting inquiries about the system. Word travels fast in this industry." Marcus smiled, still adjusting to his new reality. "Any word from Harrington Motors?" "Actually, yes. Richard has been reaching out about potential collaboration opportunities. Apparently, losing his best mechanic, and the subsequent departure of James and Devon, has impacted his premium service capabilities." After Marcus had left, James Cooper had retired earlier than planned, and Devon had accepted a position at a respected performance shop across town. The exodus had left Richard scrambling to maintain the garage's reputation, especially after Thomas Wilcox shared his experience on social media, generating millions of views and numerous comments about hidden talent and institutional bias. "And Gerald Simpson?" Marcus asked. "Withdrew his investment consideration," Liz confirmed. "Though I hear he's made a significant investment in Devon's new employer instead." Marcus nodded, satisfied but not vindictive. His success wasn't about Richard's downfall, it was about creating his own path forward. A notification on his phone reminded him of the time. "I need to wrap up. Vanessa and I are closing on the house today." With his new position came financial stability that had previously seemed unattainable. The modest but comfortable house they'd chosen was in a good school district, something Vanessa had insisted on, though they weren't yet expecting children. "Of course," Liz smiled. "Oh, and don't forget we have the patent attorney coming tomorrow to discuss protecting your diagnostic method." As Marcus packed up his things, he paused to look around the lab. The journey from being dismissed as a basic maintenance technician to having his name on patent applications had been breathtakingly swift. "Still feels surreal sometimes," he admitted. "Talent always finds its path eventually," Liz replied. "Some paths are just more difficult than others." Later that evening, after signing the papers that made them first-time homeowners, Marcus and Vanessa celebrated with a quiet dinner on their new back porch. The autumn air was crisp, and the future stretched before them with possibilities that had seemed impossible just weeks ago. "I got a text from Devon," Marcus said, scrolling through his phone. "He's loving the new job. Says he's finally being valued for his skills." Vanessa smiled. "One door opens, then another and another. Your courage created opportunities for others too." "It wasn't courage so much as desperation," Marcus admitted. "I was ready to give up so many times." "But you didn't," she reminded him, taking his hand. "And now look where we are." As they discussed plans for their new home and future, Marcus reflected on the chain of events that had transformed his life. It hadn't been just about fixing an expensive car, it had been about refusing to be defined by others' limitations, about creating space for his talents to be recognized on their own merits. The next morning, as he drove to work in the certified pre-owned luxury car he'd carefully selected, old habits of financial caution died hard. Marcus passed Harrington Motors. The familiar building looked smaller somehow, less imposing than it had when it represented the ceiling of his ambitions. He thought about Richard Harrington and felt an unexpected sense of gratitude. Without the constraints and prejudices he'd faced there, he might never have developed the tenacity and innovative thinking that now defined his work. Some talents only emerge under pressure, forged in the heat of necessity and determination. His phone rang through the car's speaker system. It was Thomas Wilcox. "Marcus. How's life as a hotshot engineer treating you?" "Still adjusting," Marcus laughed. "But good. Really good. Glad to hear it. Listen, I'm hosting a charity gala next month for STEM education in underserved communities. We're funding scholarships for promising students who lack financial resources. I'd love for you to be our guest speaker, share your journey." Marcus thought about all the young people like his younger self, brilliant minds constrained by circumstance rather than capability. "I'd be honored," he replied. As he pulled into the Chen Innovations parking lot, Marcus noticed a young black intern carefully examining the engine bay of an electric prototype. The concentration in the young man's eyes, the careful precision of his movements, it reminded Marcus of himself at that age. Tomorrow, he decided, he would introduce himself and offer to show the intern some of the projects they were working on. One door opening for another, continuing the cycle that Elizabeth Chen and others had started for him. Some talents needed only opportunity to flourish. Marcus Washington had found his, and now he could help others find theirs. Dear friend, talent knows no color, gender, or background, it only needs a chance to shine. Marcus's story reminds us that brilliance exists everywhere, often hidden behind barriers of prejudice and preconception. When we look beyond our biases and judge people solely on their abilities, we all benefit from the untapped potential that's been waiting for recognition. This isn't just a story about an engine fixed, it's about fixing the way we see each other and value what really matters: skill, determination, and character. If this message resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories that challenge perceptions and celebrate hidden heroes. Together, we can create a world where talent is never overlooked.